Welcome to episode 63 of No Rares Required, a weekly podcast where I cover the top performing commons and uncommons in a color pair or archetype that you vote on each week. And this week, Boros or Red-White won the vote. I'm going to call this one Boros Crowded because not only are you trying to flood the board as the strategy, but it is the most overdrafted archetype for what cards are available. If you're watching this for like a flashback draft that's back on Arena, I think this is the archetype that I would focus on because it was only available for the first week or two and then dried up pretty quickly. So hop on it if you can. I'll start off by going over my draft skeleton, and for those listening audio only, the broad strategy, and like I said before, the broad strategy is to flood the board with as many cards that create double rectangles with things like the Diamond Pickaxe, Plundering Pirate, that when it enters the battlefield creates a treasure token, Tinker's Totes, which is 3 cards in 1. And all of these cards enable your tappers like Sunshot Militia or the Caverns Sunborn. And if you don't know if you're not very familiar with the set yet, don't worry. We'll be going into the cards individually. Geological Appraiser is also one that's 2 cards in 1, sort of, if you have enough cards that are strictly creatures. But it's the only card in the deck that has a double pip in red. But if you do pick one up, and you do have it in your deck list, then you'll want to be in a deck that is mostly red. And luckily, most of your 2-drops that you're going to be looking for at common are also in red. And as far as removal goes, the Discover mechanic wants you to have less instances in sorceries if you're going to do the board flood strategy. So I'm usually looking to pick up Petrifies over Abrades, and you don't need very much removal. You're definitely going to want to prioritize developing the board and then making your opponent respond with a removal, since if most of your cards are creating 2 rectangles, they will fall behind if they're using removal 1 for 1. And so focus on minimal removal and use it only for emergencies. Then anytime that you are in white, you're going to want to look to use the flyers like Miner's Guidewing, the Ultec Cloud Guard, the Rune Lurker Bat to push damage, especially if you can increase their power with cards like Atali's Favor or the Diamond Pickaxe. So with that, let's cover the cards individually and when I think you should look to take them during a draft. First, I like to calculate the total wins created, and I do this by taking the average of the game's played win rate and the game in hand win rate on 17 lands. And then I subtract the average win rate of all of the users in the archetype and multiply it by the number of games played. And what this allows me to do is see which cards are which cards that are being played the most are most positively influencing the archetype's win rate. And so at the top of the list, you've got Miner's Guidewing, Ultec Cloud Guard, Rune Lurker Bat, Atali's Favor, Petrify, Anim Call, Thousandth Moon, Geological Appraiser, Clay-Fired Bricks, Sanguine Evangelist, Sunshot Militia, Caverns Sunborn, Magmatic Galleon, Warden of the Inner Sky, Breaches, Eager Pillager, Spring-Loaded Sawblades, and Unstable Glyph Bridge. And so if you don't know what those are, don't worry, we will be covering them in more detail. And then I can do the opposite of creating the total wins created and do the total wins destroyed. And so these are the cards that are the trap cards that you should look to avoid if you're revisiting the set. And so top of the list is Brazen Blademaster, which is the 2/3 that gets +2/+1 and becomes a 4/4 if you have enough artifacts in play. Glorifier of Suffering is one that you can sacrifice a creature or an artifact to put 2 +1/+1 counters onto creatures that you control. And both of these cards look like, in theory, they would play well, but they don't. The Glorifier is problematic because you care so much about each individual rectangle, especially in this archetype, that it's a trap. And then the Brazen Blademaster, you just have certain board states where you get it out there and it isn't actually becoming a 4/4. And if I remember correctly, I think the +2/+1 only happens when it's attacking, so it's kind of like it's good on offense, bad on defense. And then like Adaptive Gem Guard, you get a 3/3 Hill Giant for 4 that can tap 2 artifacts or 2 creatures and get +1/+1, a permanent +1/+1. And I thought this one was also an appealing one to pick up. The problem with it is that you have better things that you can be doing with tapping those rectangles. And then, I mean, like, and don't get me wrong, these cards, like, you can make them work. They are not like, you must never play them, but it's good to know which ones have been performing poorly in the archetype. Cosmium Blast has not been particularly good. That's the one that taps for 1 and a white to deal 4 damage to attacking or blocking creature. And the problem with it is that if your creature is blocked and then you use Cosmium Blast, that creature's damage doesn't get through. You don't have a whole lot of trample outside of the Tali's favor. Rumbling Rock Slide has performed pretty poorly in the archetype. That's the one that deals X damage, where X is the number of lands, and you can tap it for 4 to do so. And the issue with this one, I think, is that you're going for a lower curve a lot in this set. The aggro and tempo strategies have worked really well, and so your Rumbling Rock Slide, not only can it backfire, right? Like when you need it to deal 6 damage and you're stuck on 4 or 5, right? It's just not, the single point removal has been unimpressive in this set. Partially because of what I mentioned earlier during the draft skeleton, that if you're trading 1 for 1 with things that are creating more than 1 card every time they come into play, you're just going to fall behind. So Cartographer's Companion is the 2/1 that spawns for 3 colorless that spawns a map token. This one is 2 rectangles in 1. It's just not enough stats to really justify the 3 colorless, even though it is doing the rectangle thing that the archetype is trying to do. Compass Gnome is a 2/1 for 2 colorless that finds you a cave land or a basic land and puts it on top of your library. The set has not been particularly good for splashing, and so Compass Gnome is not is just an understated 2-drop. Envoy of Okonek Ahau is the 3/3 for 3 that has the mana sink to create a 1/1. And that one has just been relatively unimpressive. It's not bad, it's just filler, right? So if you can find 3-drops that do better things. A Hotfoot Gnome is a 3/1 for 3 that has haste and can tap to give something else haste. Again, this one is just like kind of play versus draw dependent. If you're steamrolling your opponent, then giving a big thing that entered the battlefield haste is okay. But if you don't have it, it's just understated for a 3-drop. Attentive Sunscribe. This one is like, we all love Attentive Sunscribe, and I think it's a 2-drop that I think a lot of people lean towards. And one of the things that I've discovered with this set is it is tempo, not strictly aggro. So like if you have a 2/2 for 2, it is outclassed. You can't just go for, I'm going to have 10 2-drops. And trust me, if you've been joining me on Twitch, I learned that lesson the hard way. So even a 2/2 artifact that when it taps scries fits the theme, it's just that it's the 2-drops are not, it's not quite as like aggro as you would typically approach Boros. You're going for more of a go wide, more of a mid-range strategy. Dowsing Device is another one that's on the top 16 worst cards in the archetype, and this one is really just play versus draw dependent. Like the ceiling of how well Dowsing Device can perform is very high. It's the one that gives, when it comes into play, you give something +1/+0 in haste, and then if you have 4 artifacts, it turns into a land that can tap for 3 to give something +X/+0 and haste, where X is the number of artifacts that you have. So if you have a whole bunch of artifacts, you'd think it would work really well. The problem is that you kind of have to take that time off, like Grasping Shadows in black, and there was another one. There's another good example. Minecart, the colorless vehicle. They're both better if you have the play versus the draw. So if you find yourself on the draw with Dowsing Device, it's going to work a lot worse for you than with the play, where you can kind of take a turn off to set up better attacks in future turns. The Seismic Monster Soar is the double pip land cycling dino that can tap 2 in a red to sacrifice a land to draw a card. You're just not going that big in this strategy. You've got a relatively low curve. The Thousand Moons Crackshot is the 1 and a white for a 2/2 Grizzly Bear that can tap 2 and a white when it attacks to tap something. Once again, another 2-drop on the list that just hasn't been performing particularly well. The Mischievous Pup, which is the 3/1 return an artifact. You can bounce an artifact to your hand. This is a lot better for looping saw blades and things like that. So like, it kind of depends on what your artifacts are, but I think it is commonly overplayed. And then the Deconstruction Hammer is another one that I think a lot of people lean towards the Deconstruction Hammer. It can be good if you have enough flyers. If it's a flashback and nobody is warranting the white flyers, it has worked well enough in like Celestia, and but you can see it's here on this list for a reason, and so you can boost your flyers power in better ways, like using the pickaxe or Atali's favor in red. So there's really no reason to lean into the deconstruction hammer in the Boros archetype. And then last but not least, we have Thousand Moons Infantry, which is the 2/4 for 3 that whenever it attacks, or it untaps at the end of or at the beginning of each person's turn. So it's like it's pseudo vigilance, but it still taps, so it still is able to get removed by like saw blades that can only damage tapped creatures. So avoid these cards if you can, and you'll be better off for it. But to really kind of dive deeper, I like to take those wins created and then divide them by the number of times that the card was picked. And so this, and then I graph it against the average taken at, or ATA, and fit the data with a logarithmic regression. And the reason why I do this is it allows me to really pinpoint which are the top performing cards at each point within the draft. So by calculating the distance of the card to the fitted line, which thanks to Carl, aka 2Duck Cubed, we'll call value over replacement, we can see which are the top performers. And no surprise here, at the start of the list, we've got Anim Pakal, Thousandth Moon, which performs best in Boros. It's I think it's splashable in blue-red, or is it? You get a 1/2 that whenever you attack with one or more non-gnome creatures, which pay attention to that, because sometimes all you do have is gnomes. You get to put a +1/+1 counter on an Impakal, and then create X 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens that are tapped and attacking, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on an Impakal. And I always forget that. I always put like Atali's favor on an Impakal to try to boost its power to make more gnomes. It doesn't work that way. The name of the game is making rectangles, especially in this archetype, and a Nimpakal just does it very, very well, and you don't have to splash for it. It's the Boros signpost rare for a reason, and it is the top performing rare in the archetype. Even over Bonehorde Dracosaur, which is an absolutely bomb-busted mythic. This card is insane. Thank God at least it is double pip red, because otherwise it would be in it would be a splashable card, right? The double pip in red does mean that you really need to not be splashing it. I know a lot of people are tempted by it because of its power level, and you do you, but double pip cards require more red than you might anticipate. For example, I do have an episode on my channel that talks about mana sources, and 3 double pip red to have an 80% chance of casting that on turn 5, you need 9 or 10 sources of red. So you can't just splash 4 and expect to be able to get to the double pip. Quintorius Cond is another one that I think is this one's a little bit more splashable than like an Impakal, because of being 5 cost, and so the longer you play it on turn 5, you're gonna have a longer time to find your off color sources, right? So this is a splashable card, I think, anytime that you are in red or white. It's a powerful planeswalker that creates on the uptick, creates a creature, so you can block for the planeswalker that just came in, and then repeatedly just continuously pump out 3/2s. And then its stagnant ability is whenever you cast a spell from exile, Quintorius Cond deals 2 damage to each opponent, and you gain 2 life. So it synergizes nicely with with its ultimate, where you can exile any number of target cards from your graveyard, add a mountain for each card, and then you may play those cards. But then also from like Discover, the Discover card, I believe, gets exiled, and so it triggers the 2 damage and gaining 2 life on your Discovers. I could be wrong on that, but that's my memory of it. I haven't gotten to actually play with Quintorius Cond very much, the classic like, I finally opened the Mythic and I saw it once in a draft, but I've seen other players play it. And then Sanguine Evangelist is one that's best in Boros and Celestia, because it pairs nicely with the Kutzil that gives out like the increased damage from the battle cry. So green-white. And so you get a 2/1 battle cry that when it enters the battlefield creates a 1/1 creature token with flying, and then when it dies, it also creates a 1/1 token with flying. So you get 3 cards in one, kind of like Tinker's Totes, but better stats at rare, right? And then we've got the Magmatic Galleon, which is better in blue-red. Is it because of the artifact synergies, or in Rakdos or black-red? which, you know, if you it just, you know, if you're removal.deck, you can, I think it works quite well in the Rakdos theme. I try to be in the tempo strategies capping off around 4. So in Magmatic Galleon, it's a little bit more mid-rangey. And it's one of those things that's like, it's kind of nitpicky because you really can take a deck wherever you want to, right? And if you pick up a Magmatic Galleon, are you going to pass it? No, you're going to try to make it work, right? It's just that there are other decks that it really, you know, like Izzet works really well because of the artifact synergies, but you're still going to use it, right? And then we got Warden of the Inner Sky, which I thought this one was going to be a Boros top performer because you get a 1/2 that as long as it has 3 or more counters on it, it has flying and vigilance, and then you can put a +1/+1 counter on it by tapping 3 untapped artifacts and/or creatures. And this card has the same issue as the adaptive Gem Guard, which is the deck is really trying to go wide and not tall. So you it's not bad though. It's a card that is, it goes in every white deck. If you're playing white, you're going to be happy with playing Warden of the Inner Sky. I just thought it was going to be one of the top performers. And then we've got Breaches, Eager Pillager, which is best in Izzet because of the pirate synergies, but its second best archetype is in Boros, largely because, kind of like a careening minecart that doesn't need to be crewed, it creates a treasure token each time that you attack, and then removing a creature as a blocker. You do have some pirate synergies as well, as you'll see. We'll be playing like Plundering Pirate and the Goblin Tomb Raiders, so you can definitely make it work in the Boros archetype. So now that the rares are out of the way in my No Rares Required podcast, let's go over the juicy bits, which is what are the undervalued, or what are the common or uncommons that should guide you into the archetype, and then what are some of the commons, some of the top performing commons that you could look to take as early as, like, you know, pick 2 or pick 3. And so we'll start things off here with the Ruin Lurker Bat, and this is a 1/1 flying lifelink. At the beginning of your instep, if you descended this turn, scry 1. This is a really good thing to put the Favor on, Atali's Favor, or the Pickaxe. Deconstruction Hammer, you know, like, is an okay thing, I think. I know it was on the top 16 of like don't do, but like I've if you have enough flyers, you can definitely get it to work. And this is just you want to start things off at turn 1 if you are doing an aggro or a tempo strategy. So look, you know, Ruin Lurker Bat's a great one to pick up. And then next on the list is Caparocti Sunborn, which is the Boros Signpost uncommon. It is actually quite good. It is best in Boros, and it's not a great splash elsewhere, largely because of, you know, splashing on 4 is a lot harder to do than splashing on 5. But it's also just like, this is the deck that's doing the Discover 3 go wide strategy. So it is on point and is best in Boros. Then we've got Ultec Cloudguard, which is a top performing common in every white archetype. You get a 3/2 flyer that spawns the 1/1, so you can block on the ground and win the race by slowing the chump blocking and slowing them down while you beat them up in the air. Geological Appraiser is it's great in every red deck. I think it performs best in Rakdos and in Izzet, and largely just because of the how much Discover are you really, like, if we're going to be running Atali's Favor and Caparocti and Geological Appraiser, like, we have so much Discover. Whereas in like Rakdos and Izzet, where the Atali's Favor, like, Atali's Favor doesn't work very well in Rakdos, so you need a different Discover outlet. Either way, it's 3 cards, you know, it's 2 cards in 1. It's very good. Izzet works with the Atali's Favors to get the flyers very similar to red white. You just put it on like a Spyglass Siren or an Oaken Siren or a Waterwind Scout instead of the 3 white flyers. And Petrify is great removal at common and white. It is the one that I choose to focus on because it is more available than like a Braid. You'll notice that a Braid did not make the list on several different archetypes. It's not that it is a bad card, it is just that for what it is offering in a set where point removal is not as strong, it is often gone by like pack 1, pick 1, or pick 2. So Petrifies tend to go a little bit later, where you can take advantage of that fact. And they also work really well. There's not a whole lot of sacrifice abilities because of how important the rectangles are. Sacrificing those rectangles is not an advantage, even for the archetype like Orsov that could be trying to do it. It just definitely comes at a price, so that makes the Petrify work quite a bit better. And then we've got Clay-Fired Bricks, which works best in Azorius, where you're trying to do like the late game kind of craft strategies. Usually getting to 7 mana is a little bit too slow for the Boros mid-range tempo deck, and it's also better in Orsov, which is kind of like the other deck that's doing the late game craft strategy with white cards. But it works in a pinch. You get a rectangle that gives you 2 life and lets you go find a land, and then if you do happen to flood out, it kind of gives you some flood protection by being able to create 2/1/1 gnome artifact creature tokens and give everything +1/+1. Which, if you are going really wide, it works better. It works better the more wide you are going with creatures, which is not always the way that this deck is going wide. So if you have a whole bunch of like treasure production, then this is a little bit worse than if you're creating a whole bunch of 1/1 counters. So keep that in mind. And then we've got Diamond Pickaxe, which I think most people immediately think of Izzet because of its interaction with Captain Storm, where you equip this, it gives a creature +1/+1. Whenever it attacks, it creates a treasure token. Whenever a treasure token enters the battlefield with Captain Storm, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on something. And so putting this on a flyer with Captain Storm, or putting it on Captain Storm itself, is just something that like people I think immediately went down that strategy. I think that it actually works in Boros, if not slightly better than it does in Izzet, just because of the general game plan of creating those treasure, using the treasure in a more effective manner than what's happening in Izzet. And like you can at least have plenty of artifact ETBs already in Izzet. And then lastly, we've got Dreadmaw's Ire, which you could use in a pinch, but because of your Discover and because you do want a high creature count in this archetype, so it's better in Izzet, in blue-red. And but still, +2/+2 and giving something trample and destroying an artifact is still a lot of value for what is being offered. Just keep in mind, if you have like 4 Dreadmaw's Ires, it's going to be something that's going to awkwardly happen off of Discover, because it can only give the creature that's attacking +2/+2. So unless you're like, if you're playing Atali's Favor pre-combat, you have to just put this into your hand. And then now we're into the value of a replacement for picks 5 through 8, and these are like, what are the undervalued uncommons that you can take advantage of, and what are the like commons that you should really be looking to take. And the start of the list is Miner's Guidewing. You get a 1/1 flying vigilance. When it dies, target creature you control explores. Nothing special about it in Boros. You want to be starting on turn 1, and it's a top performing white common. Pick them up. I was picking them up really early, like I was doing pack 1, pick 1 Miner's Guidewing, and I have mixed emotions about whether or not that's a decent idea in this set. I've had like 4 Miner's Guidewings in a deck and have it done really well, and had it done really poorly. So there's so much variance in the set. I've been having a hard time kind of navigating like what's working and what's not working, because I feel like I'll try one strategy and it'll fail, and then I'll try the strategy again and it'll trophy. But yeah, this is one of the like, take it, but I try to take it around like pick 5 and onward. Atali's Favor is +1/+1 and has trample. This one is better in. This is best, I should say, if you put it on a flyer. It's okay if you put it on like a Cavern Stomper or something huge, because it does give you trample. But really what you're trying to do is either use the blue flyers in Izzet or the white flyers in Boros and increase their power so that those Miner's Guidewings are a more respectable clock, or the Ruin Lurker Bats or the Oaken Sirens or whatever, the Spyglass Sirens are a more respectable threat to your opponent that they actually have to deal with. And then Sunshot Militia is kind of the bread and butter of Boros. And similar to like Panicked Altasaur in Gruul Dinos, it's something that like it gives you an alternative win condition. So this is kind of what you're going to be using to make a this in Caparocti Sunborn, right? Are my primary goals for utilizing all of the treasure production off of the token or the treasure producers. So being able to tap 2 untapped artifacts and or creatures to deal 1 damage gives you an alternative kind of reach in the late game. And then we've got Volatile Wanderglyph, which is the red version of the Attentive Sunscribe. And the Volatile Wanderglyph, rummaging is way better than scrying. Being able to ditch your lands and avoid flood and navigate through the early part of the game is really critical to tempo. And I do think that it is slightly better in Rakdos because it is like the best way to trigger Descended every single turn. And you know, it's an artifact, so you already get some of like the artifact synergies. But unlike in like Izzet, there's not as much artifact synergies as there is just rectangles on the board. And then Goblin Tomb Raider is best in Izzet. Everybody thinks of Izzet because of the pirate synergy. It works surprisingly well in Boros as long as you have enough artifacts to make it into a 2/2 haste, which, following the draft guide and what I'm talking about right now, you should have plenty of artifacts. Plundering Pirate is a 3/2 that when it enters the battlefield, create a treasure token. And you know, it's 2 cards in 1, which is kind of what you're trying to do. It's decently statted as well, so it's especially on defense while you're just like sitting back waiting to win through the air. The 3 power works really well, which I think is why Vanguard of the Rose, Boros is its best archetype. You're not looking to sacrifice other creatures or artifacts very often, which is why like Orsov was just kind of like not great. But in this one, you can have it sit back and you can just use it to trade with like a 3-drop or a 4-drop. And like a Pathfinding Axe draw that missed the Explorer or whatever, right? And being able to trade a 1/1 to do it multiple times in a row is really great if you have a clock that's beating them up in the air. And then Tinker's Tote is the last one. It's a top performing white common in every archetype. It's not outstanding. It does have, like, I think it's, it works really well with like the craft synergies, but it also works anytime that you have the white flyers because you get 2 chump blockers and 3 life from 1 card. And if you have like the Sunshot Militia, you can end up tapping it and just dealing a bunch of damage. So the one downside I will have to say is that there are not any cards in the archetype that I aim to wheel. There is no value over replacement for picks 8 and onward. There will be cards that wheel that you want, sure. But on average, the cards that I'm looking to build the deck with are not available late. And so you don't get any unlucky drops, you don't get any brackish blunders that people don't know how to feel about and whatnot. So that's the one downside, is that of all of the archetypes, it's not that this one is the most heavily drafted. It might be. I have to actually look at it. If I remember correctly, Azorius is the most winning and the most drafted archetype. But because it doesn't have any of these undervalued cards, it's very difficult to get into Boros and not have it be contested. I found it to be like Jeskai is already a very crowded space, and I found that the Boros side of things, when you don't have the undervalued blue cards, is even more crowded. But every once in a while, the stars align and you get, you open up a Nymph Call and red-white is open from the get-go, and it feels great. So next week I'll be covering the last archetype, which is Celestia, or green-white. And then it'll be time to focus on Murders at Karlov Manor, which is coming to Arena in the first week of February, I believe February 6th. So remember to hit like and subscribe for more near daily Magic content. One day I might even be able to be a Magic the Gathering ambassador and get early access on the streamer events and complete my dreams. But thanks for listening and being a part of my community. I really appreciate it. Good luck on your games and your future trophies, and thank you all for the support, and I will see you next week.